Hello and welcome to another episode of Monster Monday from the Ready to Die channel. Using the rules for making monsters in Pathfinder Second Edition, I build stat blocks of creatures for my own games and to share with the community. I also operate a blog where these stat blocks can be found alongside a Pathfinder First Edition and D&D 5e version, which is linked below along with the Monster Monday Twitter and Discord. Today's monster was a request I received and a temporary return to some higher level monsters, the Elder Dragons Lunastra and Teostra. These Leonin Elder Dragons were introduced in Monster Hunter 2 and are respectively the female and male of their species. Teostras are red in color with long horns curling from their heads, while Lunastras are blue and instead of horns have crown-like protrusions. Associated with the fire and blast elements, they are referred to as the Emperor and Empress of Flame. In some of the reworks I've done on the creatures from Monster Hunter, I've been building most Elder Dragons in similar sorts as level 18 creatures, and that felt appropriate here. Now, a lot of the so-called wyverns of Monster Hunter aren't actually what I would consider dragons. However, their somewhat draconic appearance, classification as Elder Dragons, and the fact that Lunastra and Teostra are both outright immune to paralysis and sleep, which is a common dragon immunity, led to me to design them as such. And just like a red dragon has a fire trait, so too will this destructive draconic duo. Despite the differences in appearance, name, and even a few abilities, I felt that the powerful Pyro pair were similar enough to use a singular stat block, with abilities that made specific callouts and distinctions. However, their numbers are all the same. As a pair of massive Leonin creatures, they have a strength score that pushes towards a high value, and ends up being their highest ability score. Many of their other ability scores appear high, but are actually on the lower end for their level, with their intelligence taking the biggest hit since they are fairly bestial. Interestingly, in Monster Hunter World, Teostras don't attack on sight, which influenced my decision to build them with a moderate perception bonus. In actual gameplay, the constantly combustive couple have a weakness to the water and cold elements, which I folded into the latter type of elemental damage with a fairly heavy weakness. On the other hand, it is immune to fire damage, as well as paralysis and sleep, as I mentioned earlier. Taking these weaknesses and resistances into account, I assigned them a hit point value on the high end for their level. Hopefully, this will allow their abilities that take a while to come online do so, and give them a more common rotation of them. However, they will only use a moderate AC value, which most martials of equal level will hit on an 8 for their first attacks. This makes them a bit tankier, but not as hard to hit. With their abilities to survive in harsh environments such as volcanoes and arid deserts, my natural inclination was to build them with a high fortitude save. They also like leaping around a lot, and so I used a moderate reflex save, with their weakest save being Will, with a low value. This lower armor class and Will save will give a chance for both marshals and casters to target the pair. In my journey through Monster Hunter World, I was smacked by a few tail swings from Lunastra and Teostra, but the attacks felt too uncommon for me to include as a regular strike. Instead, they use a claw and jaw strike with a moderate attack bonus, since they focus slightly more on using their abilities. Based on the tests I ran, this moderate bonus actually felt pretty good against on-level PCs. The monsters were landing hits pretty heavily, and despite using low and moderate damage ranges, the party definitely felt the weight of these blows. As is usual for these sorts of attacks, the claws have the agile trait and a lower damage value to compensate for such a powerful trait. As a quick aside, something that I have learned about myself through the monsters I've created is that I love designing abilities that interact with each other or other parts of the monster's kit. And I really got to play around with that when it came to building these two. For example, the temperamental twosome have an awe-inspiring array of abilities in their arsenal, and I want to start with the sort of what lies at the core of that. Fire Up. In Monster Hunter, Lunastra and Teostra will slowly charge up their power, which adds additional effects to their attacks and allows them to unleash their full devastating potential. After some consideration, I decided that the best way to design this ability was to borrow from the Psychic class and its Unleash Psyche action. Fire Up, similarly, is a free action that rather than being triggered by casting a spell, requires the creature to use an action with the Fire trait on the previous turn. Once used, it adds additional effects to several of the other abilities in their arsenal, or allows them to unleash their ultimate attacks. Either options consume the Fired Up status and puts it back on cooldown. Because of this, most of their special abilities are gated by using this ability rather than cooldowns of their own. When it comes to triggering Fire Up, there are only two abilities in their arsenal that will do so. Both are straightforward, with the easier one being Sparking Fangs. This is a 2-action ability that allows the Lunastra Teostra to make a jaw strike and deal some additional fire damage, raising it to a high average damage. This was a fun ability to incorporate because, in lore, they strike their teeth together to create the spark that ignites their blast dust. This ability helps to represent that, while also playing into some mechanical function for this build. It also has no cooldown, so that the pair can use it as much as they want, unlike their flamethrower, which is just a breath weapon with a fancy name. This uses the average damage for a limited use ability that deals damage in an area, but if saved for after they become fired up, it can light targets on fire as well, per Fireblight and Monster Hunter. There are some movement abilities in their kits, with Dive Bomb allowing them to fly in conjunction with a Jaw Strike, and Pounce being a stride across the ground, followed by a Claw Strike. They are further differentiated by the monster being fired up. Dive Bomb is based on the attack from the air that detonates as it lands, dealing damage in emanation at the end of it. On the other hand, Pounce is based on the charge where they leave blast dust in their wake that they quickly ignite. Design-wise, this additional effect on Pounce is based on the Nightmare's Gallop ability. Given the movement and strikes included in these abilities along with their action economy, I use a lower damage range for both of them, with a high DC for their level. The final abilities that make use of being fired up are the 2 super moves of the Tantrum Tossing Terrain Torching 2. These are actually separate abilities, with the Lunastra wielding her Heat Wave and the Teostra having a Supernova. In Monster Hunter, Lunastra's big move deals chip damage, while also staggering creatures caught in the blast. To achieve this effect, I was interested in using the Drain condition and knocking people back, while the Critical Failures Fatigue condition is based on general heat sickness. Teostra's ability is much simpler, and is simply a massive blast of damage. However, based off of their bond in Monster Hunter World, the two can ready their abilities to use together, increasing the DC of their effects from high to almost extreme values, and applying both effects to their areas. They have to be adjacent to each other to trigger these effects, so the overlapping areas might not matter as much, given that most enemies in range of one will also be within range of the other. I also specifically wanted these abilities to necessitate different saves to make them feel a bit more distinct aside from just their effects. Outside of their abilities that utilize Fire Up, the Combustive Couple have a few other tricks up their sleeve. They can cover an area with Blast Dust by using Scatter Dust, which gave me another opportunity to make them more distinct. As per world, Lunastra's dust is heavier, laying on the ground when she spreads it and burning when ignited. Whereas, akin to its supernova, the Teostra scatters his dust in the air around it. I kept this ability as a single action since it doesn't have any immediate damage effects and requires triggering, which can make it feel like a 3-action activity. Because of that, I did have the Blast Dust remain active until the end of the creature's next turn. While the dust can be triggered by Sparking Fangs or Flamethrower, it can also be activated by some of their other abilities if they are fired up. I kept the damage of this effect a little lower to account for the fact that it will often be accompanying another pop of damage. Semi-related to this power is the Powerful Wings ability. This is another single action ability that can knock hunters prone, but can also move dust around if they have reposition in the time it takes to trigger the dust. It's a pretty simple ability that interacts with other parts of their kit, while also inflicting a easily removable condition on the players that still has an action tax and can potentially keep them trapped in an area. The final ability of the Lunastra and Teostra combo is the Superheated Aura, which is named by combining their 2 big abilities, and is a pretty standard damaging aura representing the heat they give off in-game. As an aura, it uses a low save for the level. I'm happy that I was able to make this ability target Fortitude because I always feel iffy about focusing a monster too much on a single save. It isn't as big an issue for a monster with less abilities, but can feel a bit like putting too many of your eggs in one basket, and is an issue I can see in the Teostra. In the test for these two, it wasn't overly noticeable, likely because I was able to have it intermix its attacks and abilities with the Lunastra. My testers have convinced me that weapons are the preferred equipment for players to get, but I wanted to do something a little different this time around. Going forward, I may build Elder Dragon equipment as apex items, playing into the power these creatures wield. The first of these is the Mantle of the Emperor, based on the titles of Lunastra and Teostra. Given their majesty, I decided to make this a Charisma apex item, while the effects it grants are based off the skills granted by their armor sets. Teostra armor focuses on critical effects and is represented by adding the Deadly trait to the weapons the character wields. Meanwhile, Lunastra's armor has a number of different skills, but seems a bit more defensive and is focused on using tools and consumables. There were a couple of ways I could have gone with it, but I decided to lean into the whole being a leader of the people thing and the wide range skill on it with its activated effect. Perhaps this could be used more frequently, but even consumables at that level can get pretty crazy, so I wanted to limit it. Well, that was a long one. Thanks for sticking it out. But we have finally come to the end of the combined Lunastra Teostra build. This combustive couple cast conflagrations constantly, and between their movement abilities and auras, the heroes may struggle to find a safe distance at which to engage them. I tested these two as a pair against an equal level party, making for a moderate encounter that still proved fairly dangerous to the heroes as they were feeling out their foes and had some unlucky rolls. I definitely think running these two as a pair is the best way to do so, but they can also easily be run as a solo encounter as their abilities are not overly reliant upon each other. You can check out the Monster Monday blog and Twitter for the stat blocks, or hop on the Discord to join the monster making and general tabletop discussions. These posts also include a Pathfinder First Edition version of the monster, along with a D&D 5e conversion. Thanks for watching and have a monstrous Monday!